Destiny swapping. God has a plan for you, but so does the opposition. Neither one will spell it out for you. You can't trust me either. You have to figure the game out on your own, like I did. This is my story. My name is Elijah Kane, and I was born into the program. The gang stalkers, honeypots, and handlers have surrounded me my whole life. I was even 5150'd and betrayed while vulnerable and briefly lived on the streets with nothing. In part 1, I gave the background of my story. In this part 2, I will tell the story about how I was 5150'd by someone I opened up to because I trusted them and how I got taken advantage of. This event will be a changing point of my journey, and the downward spiral will continue until I am homeless at night in Los Angeles and staying awake all night, staying on the move, out of fear. It's another world out there, and it's always right there. So stay tuned for this gruesome affair. Destiny swapping, gang stalking, and how I read my way to an awakening, the journey through hell of Elijah Kane.
Finding yourself in the talons of an owl in the shadows of the forest moonlight, it's a gruesome affair.
They give you something innocent and unthreatening, a youthful actor or a subculture movement. One day, it's just the Beatles and a subculture movement that promotes peace and love and simple living until they take an archetype of that movement and redirect that archetype into hell. The 1960s, for example, was a period for the hippies and the beatniks, talking about the free love and peace amongst nations, but the machine would sacrifice this archetype. That is why so many say the 1960s ended on August 8th, 1969. That is the day the archetypes of the movement were sacrificed. Charles Manson's cult showed up at Sharon Tate's house. On arrival at 10050 Cielo Drive, cult member Charles Texas Watson spoke, "I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work." Sharon Tate later asked, "What are you going to do to us?" And Watson replied, "You're all going to die." Sharon Tate was so beautiful, she literally stopped traffic when she visited New York City. She was said to potentially be the next Marilyn Monroe, but that was all taken from her. That is destiny swapping. This is in the more extreme part of the spectrum of destiny swapping stories that I can think of, but actually, there are so many. Her life was swapped from success and a glamorous career, and as a mother-to-be, her life was swapped to being the sacrificial poster girl of the end of an era, the end of the 1960s and the hippie movement. Her life was swapped from a dream life to being the victim of one of the most high-profile mass murders in American history and Hollywood. Later, in a courtroom setting, the 4 members of the cult heard the verdict for their crime. They were all convicted of murder and sentenced to the death penalty. Cult member Leslie Louise Van Houten shouted out, "Your whole system is a game." My life has been destiny swapped. I was supposed to be more than this. I think you were too, probably supposed to be more than what you are, dear listener. I don't like to have a victim mindset or victim identity, but I know that with guidance, that would have encouraged my life path to be healthy instead of negative encouragement that hindered it, I would be another person today. It is not just me. Each of us are units of something bigger. It is our communities, our country, and our world that is destiny swapped in this way. When I was just starting to rise, I was encouraged. That is when I was working and got really fit during my early 20s. I had a personal trainer, Eric. Once I got to a higher level, it was like the same people that were encouraging me earlier started making comments, talking behind my back, and outright avoiding me. I've heard the saying that people want you to do well, just not do more well than them. Experiencing this firsthand, I got unfocused, lost my momentum, and would not only fall out of shape, but out of work and destitute until I was even homeless. I did live that life of being absolutely homeless for over 2 months. There have been leaps in human ability. We now all have supercomputers in our pocket. We call it a phone. A phone it is, but it is so much more than a phone. Mind control has never been so effective and ubiquitous in human history. The dark ones know how to innocuously penetrate the subconscious. They know that you got to get them young. Growing up, my father mostly ignored me while my mother was smothering. She wouldn't let me play outside the house with other children for most of my childhood, finally giving me some freedom as I approached 15 years of age. She said I was safe at home. I know now that that is not a true statement. I have been 5150'd by my own family as an adult. Can you imagine that? My own sister-in-law called the police and said that I need to be taken in. Being 5150'd is loosely defined as being a threat to either other people or being a threat to yourself. They want this, actually. They make you crazy. And then when you go crazy, they say, "See, he's crazy." And your reputation is smeared. This is called reaction abuse. Some call it manufactured schizophrenia, but it doesn't have to be schizophrenia. It can be depression, anxiety, paranoia, anything as long as it sounds really bad and leaves the reputation of the target tarnished and questionable. You are a loose cannon. They say you are having psychosis and they can help you, but they are in fact your handlers, and they want the truth you see to stay hidden or stay confused. They want you who speaks the truth to be silenced and to be thought of as crazy. The last thing they want to know or hear is the actual truth. The last thing they want is for you to really understand that the truth that your eyes are seeing and your ears are hearing is definitely, actually the truth. No, this kind of thinking would be dangerous for them. They want you to doubt your gut feelings. They want you to doubt your instincts, and literally want you to doubt what you see and hear with your own eyes and your own ears. I've learned to be careful with my words. Maybe careful is not accurate enough. I've learned to be hypervigilant with my words. Anything I can say to a family member can and will be used against me later. But I guess we are getting used to this in 2025. Any text message we send to anybody can be taken out of context, screenshotted, and posted in the group chat. My father had me sign some papers too while I was drugged up in that mental hospital, and I don't even know what I signed. They say you are crazy, then they bring you in and drug you up on tranquilizers or whatever, and then they take advantage of you or make a case that you are indeed crazy. It has been a theme with my father having me sign papers without me clearly knowing what I am signing or what the papers are even about. The words echo in my mind. It's for our survival. I will tell more about that hazy experience and the betrayal and signing those papers later. When I finally moved out and was on my own, I got into drinking, drugs, and hooking up. Occasionally, handlers would come into my life and redirect me, intervene, or outright kidnap me and take me to an unknown location that I later cannot remember. All I remember is the traumatic start and the loss of time. In one of the more traumatic experiences, a man who was dressed professionally grabbed me and put a cloth on my mouth. I don't know what it was, if it was scopolamine, aka devil's breath, or what, but my intuition is that I was taken to a laboratory environment for programming or taken to a nearby military base. It seemed like a lot of what people were speaking were memorized scripts. I could predict what their next line would be. It is like the narcissist. Eventually, you know their playbook. If you point out their lies or horrific behaviors, you can predict their reaction. Then in your own mind, you run through your counter reaction. Just thinking about how they'll react and how you'll react to their reaction just wears you down. It's not worth it to argue with a narcissist. The only winning strategy for a game you cannot win is to not play. You learn to be silent. A part of you wants some kind of acknowledgement that what they did was wrong, and then you realize they'll never give it to you. It's not worth anything to them, and they don't care. And then it hits you. You don't care either, and that is a beautiful thing. The only time the narcissist apologizes for their manipulation tactics is because they've been found out and are seeking another round in the abuse cycle. When you understand this, it makes it easier to walk away, to walk out of hell. But the hive mind, the spiritual darkness in high places, is always there, always scheming. And they use the same scripts again and again like a broken record. And eventually, you stop fighting them. You stop trying to wake others up. You just start living your own life in a reality that you create. Actually, when you get to this point, it is accompanied with a lot of responsibility. However, also freedom. When you realize nobody externally is coming to save you, you either die right there, or you discover the bright shining light within. You start building, and you start really living. Once your efforts start yielding results, you intensify the momentum. You realize there is no limit, and you discover that you can build and build until you are living in the golden city as written in Revelation. Shakespeare said all the world's a stage. Specifically in 1599, as part of a speech in the play As You Like It, he writes, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts." I know what he meant by that, and he really hit the nail on the head with that one. My life has had many episodes of trauma and abuse theater, and it is just in these recent years since my awakening that I am able to start seeing it for what it is. When the kidnapping happened, the last thing I remember is that cloth on my mouth. I have no memory of the following 6 days. They have ways to retrieve memories. What specifically happened, I do not know. But somewhere, I believe there are data entries and notes about the experience. I would like to access these somehow in the future and discover the truth. From what I understand, they don't keep paper files anymore. It's all digital. I heard once from a psychologist that people with borderline personality disorder are often referred to as thick file patients. Maybe they need to update that expression to large memory space patients or something like that. Well, somewhere out there, I know there is a lot of information saved about me and things that happened to me. But the last person they would want to access this information is actually exactly me. They want to keep me in the dark. There's something about this, but I think I am targeted to bring them a baby. My first girlfriend, 1 week into dating, asked me, "Do you want to have a child?" I met another girl and left her days after that. In this way, it is generational. My dad volunteered to have his children to be put into the program. San Diego has many military bases. It is all planned out. It seems like women repeatedly meet me and quickly want to have children. Another I met in my early 20s just wanted this. I met her outside a nightclub in San Diego. Even my brother tried to set me up with a girl in my early 20s, with the headline being that she would be a great mother. This is the way there are low-key arranged marriages. The people in my life that I called friends dwindled until I had one friend. Then I realized what kind of person he is, and I ghosted him. The last and final friend was Trevor. "I got this guy all strung out," he told me. He seemed to be boasting about guiding a soul into hell. I knew he'd guide me to hell if I let him. He was my only so-called friend, and I cut him off. It seemed like everyone cut me off, and the few that remained, I cut them off. I wonder sometimes who exactly my handlers are. Some are clear, some I wonder. Sometimes it seems like a big clandestine program. Some things, though, can't be explained. Some people seem to somehow tap into the hive mind. It's like the evil hive mind infects them and takes them over and gives them assignments. I want to say that alcohol and drugs make people more susceptible to this dark influence. I have received cryptic text messages from people with double meanings. I believe they were under the influence of alcohol, specifically wine, when they sent the text. It is my belief that the evil hive mind can influence them easier and more boldly when they are in this state. This is actually the point in my life when I got 5150'd. Having been cut off by all the people an earlier version of myself thought were friends, and cutting the last off because I realized they are literally destroyers. I became isolated. I also had time to think about all the strange coincidences, which were in fact synchronicities. It was like one by one, they all dropped out of my life. I had been doing well. With my fitness instructor, I had gotten in really good shape. But nobody said, "Good job, you've been building wealth and got in good shape." No, their words were devaluing. They devalued what I accomplished. Like I said earlier, I was accused of doing steroids when I had not done steroids. I took it as a compliment, actually, that they might think that, but I also had this strange feeling, like it devalued the work that I did to receive this result. I had been put down, and being accused of this made me yield to actually doing them. A younger and less mature version of myself thought people would encourage me and celebrate my success and encourage me to fly as high as I could fly. This was not correct. When I was getting there, it became a shock that people I trusted turned against me. You can catch the jealousy in their jokes, the put-downs. They say stuff like, "It was just a joke," or "Don't be so sensitive," or some other overused script to hide their put-down as something palatable. I saw through it though, and it was a big wake-up about how many minds work. I don't like admitting it, but the negative reactions to my progress made me stop training and stop trying at life. I know this was a mistake, and this comes down to spiritual strength. I was still then in a place where I was trying to live up to an image and actually cared about approval and validation from people. Now I know that as a man, my only source of approval and validation is my Creator. It's the bitter truth. However, now I appreciate the beauty of bitter truths. I hadn't woken up at that point. Losing friends, the jealousy and put-downs veiled as jokes weighed heavy on me. I didn't have the strength to not care at that time. It seemed like gang stalking because it seemed coordinated. I had a shared apartment at that time and had had a huge argument with both my roommates. We were slamming doors and there was literally holes in the wall from our argument. It ended with both of them moving out and I was stuck paying the full rent by myself. At least I finally had peace. I spoke with my sister-in-law about this on the phone. I was still heated up from the aftermath of the arguments, but I didn't say anything alarming, or so I thought. She acted like she cared. She put on that feminine, nurturing vibe, and I fell for it and opened up to her. "Are you okay, Elijah?" she said. I thought she was genuinely concerned for my welfare. I said, "I am so over everything." Well, she took that line to the max, and she called the police. She weaponized that statement I said in what I thought was confidence with her. That was the trigger for my 5150. She pulled the trigger. This also taught me that when I open up and say anything, it can be exaggerated to the max, catastrophized, weaponized, and used to destroy me. I now see people acting super nice as a huge red flag. The police took me in and I was drugged in a mental hospital. The first night my dad came, I had not seen or spoken to my father in years, but here he was visiting me in a mental hospital. I was drugged and my memory is blurry, but I remember he looked good and fit and acted concerned and that he wanted to help. He had brought a bunch of papers and asked me to sign them. Like I said earlier, I did sign the papers, but I was not sure what they were or what I was signing. My dad took off. He got what he wanted, and he never did reach out after that. I guess he just wanted those papers signed. I don't know what I signed out of or transferred away from me to him, but the fake nice, the blurry, drugged memory was definitely worth nothing to me too. I was vulnerable, and he used that chance to strike. He got what he wanted. I was in that mental hospital for 3 days, and I think the sedatives they were giving me just suddenly wore off. I realized where I was. I realized what was happening, and I just stood up and just walked out of there. I just left the place. This is my life. My friends and family have turned against me, and based on some emotional words on one phone call, now I have on my record the 5150 or whatever diagnosis they could cook up. It was just me. No friends, no family, no job, no money. I was now in Los Angeles. I knew of a shelter in the city, and I stayed there. It was okay. I wouldn't call it paradise, but I had a safe place to sleep and an actually reasonable meal every morning. It is a fact about hell. It feels like a prison, but the doors are always open. It is always possible to just walk away. Like the devil tarot card, the chains on Adam and Eve wrap around both of their necks loosely. At any time, they can just lift those chains off over their heads and walk away if they get the inclination, the courage, and the will. So there I was, homeless, but I had a free place to stay at the shelter each night and a UBT card that I could spend the credit on for food as I pleased. Life was some kind of good. The thing is, the shelter had a curfew too, and I had to stand in line to get in by 8 p.m. each day. They kicked us out early each morning, so the homeless residents and myself were back on the streets at 5 a.m. I am not a morning person, so this was not my choice schedule. Further, there were people at the shelter that were targeting me. Some of them were like zombies. A lot of people there and on the street seemed to be gang stalkers. They would make random comments that targeted me. It did seem spiritual, because how could these random people and homeless people at the shelter make comments that had relevance to specific personal things in my life? It was like the devil whispered something in their ear, egging them to say specific words. Knowing the words would have meaning for me and would trigger me, it felt orchestrated. This all was too much for me to handle. During one outing, I was at the dollar store. There was this one lady watching me. She seemed to be pretending to put things in her cart, but her cart was still empty. She was a perp. She had her dodgy eyes on me. I went up close to her, too close, and pretending also to be looking at things on the shelf in the store. Then I said, "Why are you following me?" She looked back at me and said, "Excuse me?" This is what they do. Then she continued, "Are you on drugs? You might want to get some help with that," she said. With that, she just walked away, leaving her empty cart there next to me. She left the dollar store and went outside. I could see her walk up to a car. She got in the car. Then this big, tall, white guy comes in the store and checks me out from afar. Things like this happen a lot. Being homeless was not that bad, but the gang stalking was ramping up. And inside the shelter, I was being offered drugs for free. It's amazing how when you quit an addiction, it will come to you so easy and so free. Keeping it together and dealing with the full resolution of life was getting hard. I am reluctant to admit it, but I did relapse. Several weeks in, I was getting comfortable with living at the shelter. It wasn't a life that many would want, but I did have food in my belly and a safe place to sleep each night, until I didn't. It's a whole different game being on the street at night, and I was about to learn all about it. I queued up online at the shelter to get in by the 8 p.m. curfew. I stood there for maybe 20 minutes waiting when they announced that the shelter was full and they could not take any more people, and it hit me. This was to be the first night of my life where I was homeless at night. Not sleeping in the shelter with a credited UBT card in my pocket. No, I was on the street after nightfall, and let me tell you, dear listener, this is not a situation that anybody wants to be in. Did I get sleep? No, I did not. I was too scared to sleep at night. I tried to keep it together and look like someone who had somewhere to be. I kept moving and avoided contact with people. There is something about being alone and homeless and in an unforgiving urban landscape like LA. It becomes a hellscape. No home, no car, no keys to anything, actually. When daybreak came, my feet were tired and aching from being on the move all night. I went to a green area by the shelter and finally got some sleep. This went on for a couple weeks until it got to the point that it had to end, and it did. Many have to hit rock bottom before they wake up and start living their life with purpose. But not many will hit this level of rock bottom, surrounded by gang stalkers and perps trying to give me free drugs while staying on the move throughout the night out of fear. For the purpose of this Smoking Owl Tale story, I really tried to remember some specific scripts that I heard at night while I was homeless, while in that state of terror and on the move always for my safety. I really racked my brain trying to remember, but I think my mind compartmentalized details of that experience. I cannot remember any specific incidences or scripts, but I do remember the reality that it was. At night, it was like a whole other world. Tents were all over the place, and homeless people were all over the place, just wandering around aimlessly, going nowhere. It almost seemed to me like the homeless lived their life at night, the opposite of the majority of society. That is why you don't really see that many homeless people during the day. It is because they are awake all night, and most of them are asleep during the day. It literally felt like I was in a dark and hellish alternative reality in another dimension, which, in a way, I guess I can say it really was in that moment in time. That's where I was at that point in my life. I hope this is a place you never see, dear listener. I was challenged a lot by these homeless people. They were not easy on me, that is for sure. They all knew I was a newbie on the street, and they knew, I knew, they knew. They seemed like they were possessed, demon-possessed. They all had such a different mindset. Their energy was detached, like they weren't even human. It was scary. So after a few weeks of that, I felt the activation energy finally to get out of there. I didn't want to be on the streets anymore. I decided to really get focused and make a plan to escape this hell that I never wanted to be in anyway. Like written in that Daniel Cross story here on Smoking Owl Tales, as bad as hell is, there is a certain comfort in staying for just another or just 2 more days. I needed to get off the streets, and I knew it could not wait. The only person that I spoke to and trusted was my older brother. I had no insurance, nothing, but he had an idea. He told me about a church that brings people in situations like mine and gets them back on their feet. They do this free of charge, but of course, there is a catch.
Do this free of charge, but of course, there is a catch. Free of charge, but of course, there is a catch.
That concludes part 2 of this 3-part series. In the next part 3, I will start to get on my feet. I will get a job and become independent, but the gang stalkers will be haunting me on this part of my journey. They will have specific scripts and specifically use color sensitization, specifically the color red, to send signals to me, signals that they are watching me. During part 3 is when my awakening happens, during which a honeypot will literally wait for me in the hallways of my apartment complex. So be sure to subscribe and visit again on another night soon for the 3rd part of this 3-part series, The Journey Through Hell of Elijah Kane. It's been awesome having you visit for this horrible tale. Dusk is a time of transition. It's an owl's wake-up call. As the shadows grow longer and darkness takes over, the only thing to fear is fear itself. You can also catch Smoking Owl Tales on Reddit, TikTok, Instagram, and X, the social platform formerly known as Twitter. A pure audio version of these tales is available as a podcast on Apple, Spotify for podcasters, Podbay, Google Podcasts, and TuneIn, amongst others. There continues to be multiple mind-blowing collaboration stories in the works, and many of them are based on real stories from listeners of the Smoking Owl Tales YouTube channel. If you feel the call, give a rip at the subscribe button and scratch at the comment. Smoking Owl now has released a debut track titled Eternal Soul. So now I know, I am an eternal soul. It is available on Spotify and all major streaming services. A link to the Spotify version of the track is available in the description, but you can find the track easily by searching Smoking Owl on your streaming service. So, when you're driving your second loop around the 285 in Atlanta and that company van with no phone number is still trailing you, you know which track to play. I am sincerely grateful for your presence here, So stay longer now or catch you on another night soon, because the story goes on and on and on and on
and on and on and on and on and on and on.